In a subgenre dominated by a few established titles for years, a new challenger emerges. Enter Rennsport, an upcoming sim racing game promising ultra-realistic graphics, a focus on esports, and a marketplace where user-generated content, including custom cars and tracks, can be bought and sold. In keeping with the esports focus, Rennsport announced a massive esports circuit before the game was even available in beta. It's called ESL R1, in partnership with ESL, a major esports tournament organizer. It offers €500,000 in prize money across 2 seasons, split between drivers and teams. The inaugural season of R1 would have 12 invited organizations fielding 4 drivers each for every round of the circuit. While most of the invited teams were endemic to sim racing, a few of the orgs were better known for other esports titles, and didn't have a long or recent history in sim racing. Because Rennsport was still a pre-beta game that only teams and select content creators had access to, ESL R1 would be most people's introduction to the game. Traditional sim racing esports leagues, or circuits, typically have 1 or 2 races per round, and the races tend to be long, maybe a multiple-hour endurance race, or 2 shorter sprint races. However, ESL R1 had a much different approach, an elimination tournament with short races that qualify the top drivers into the next stage. This means that a typical round would have the 48 participating drivers split into 4 random groups, with 1 driver per team, per group, with the top 6 drivers of each race advancing to the semifinals. Once again, drivers would be split up into groups, with the top 6 advancing into a 12-driver final. That's a total of 7 15 or so minute races per round, and each one has their own qualifying session, with 1 lap. Points are not given per race, but rather for where a driver finishes in either the final race or the race they were eliminated in. A driver's worst result in the first 6 of the season's 8 rounds is dropped, and this calculation happens at the end of the regular season. The cars being raced would be 4 modern GT3s from the German manufacturers Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Porsche. Every team had to select 1 car that their drivers would be locked into for the entire season. Some testing had been done before the season to improve the balance of performance. With some of the top teams in sim racing competing, the field of drivers was extremely competitive, and drew from top performers in iRacing, ACC, rFactor 2, and F1 esports. Non-endemic team driver selections were also high quality, although FaZe Clan did field Call of Duty player Crimsix as one of their 4 drivers, and that didn't go very well. Now, let's review how the inaugural season of ESL R1 played out, round by round. The first 2 rounds of ESL R1 were held in person, at ESL's Katowice event in Poland. It had a cool stage setup, and brought the pressure of competing in person on standardized equipment instead of the comfort of a racer's own home. There was a lot of excitement to see who would best adapt to the new game. Would drivers from a specific title be more suited to Rennsport than others? The track was Spa-Francorchamps, an iconic and extremely popular sim racing track. Team Redline got off to a strong start, with 3 of their 4 drivers either winning or placing second in their quarterfinal races. Apex Racing Team and Team RHG had all 4 of their drivers advance to the semifinals. Conversely, FaZe Clan would see all of their drivers eliminated in the quarters. Redline's success wouldn't continue in the semifinal stage though, with only Luke Bennett advancing to the finals, a race where he would ultimately finish second from last. RHG looked like the team to beat, with 3 of their drivers scoring podiums in the semifinals, and 2 of those drivers scoring podiums in the final race. However, it was Maximilian Benecke, the highest rated driver from iRacing, who won the first ESL R1 final race, establishing himself as the driver to beat. We didn't have to wait long for round 2, since it was held the day after round 1. This time, the track was Germany's Hockenheimring. While high-performing teams such as Redline and RHG continued their success, it was Porsche Coanda and Mercedes-AMG Petronas Esports, 2 teams that had little success in round 1, apart from individual drivers Josh Rogers and James Baldwin respectively, who advanced all of their drivers into the semi-finals this time around. The final race saw a lot of familiar names from round 1's final, with half of the drivers making a repeat finals appearance. RHG and Mousesports drivers produced another strong set of finishes here, and we once again saw a top iRacing driver take the win. But this time, it was Porsche Quanda's Josh Rogers, who has so far been the only driver of a Porsche car to have made a finals appearance. The final race also had an exciting battle at the back of the field, with positions 8 through 12 finishing the race just under 1 second apart. However, their finish was not shown on stream. After the event's land debut, rounds 3 through 8 would be held online, and round 3 would be held at Germany's Nürburgring GP circuit. This would be the third and final unique track that ESL R1 races at, until the title-deciding major in the postseason. Teams who struggled to make deep runs so far, such as Furia and BMW M Team BS Competition, saw early success, with each team advancing 3 of their drivers into the semi-finals, and 1 each into the final. BS Competition's Nils Nauhawk would be the standout driver throughout the season, and he finished second in the final race. The sole Team Redline driver in the finals, Luke Bennett, would end up taking the trophy. Because Rennsport only had 3 tracks, Spa-Francorchamps returns for round 4. Round 4 also saw the first player substitutions in ESL R1. Furia replaced Felipe Baptista, who had been their top performer up till then, with Denmark's Lasse Sorensen, a driver who had immediately made an impact by getting into the finals. Lasse would drive for Furia for the remainder of the season and be their second best performing driver. BMW M Team BS Competition also had Ibrahim Khan sit in for Phil Dinez. Team Heroic got 3 of their drivers into the semi-finals, but none of them could make the finals. Team Redline and RHG continued their trend of scoring podiums in the later stages of ESL R1 races, with 5 out of 6 of the semi-final podiums being occupied by drivers of either team. They were up there in the final race as well, but Williams Esports driver Dyer McCormack would take the win. McCormack becomes the first driver of a Mercedes to win a round, and at this point, a car from each of the 4 manufacturers has won a finals race. Round 5 went back to Hockenheim. If Spa-Francorchamps seemed to favor the Audi and BMW, Hockenheim in round 2 saw success for Porsche and Mercedes drivers. Would this happen again? Early races pointed to yes, with all 3 Audi teams having some of their lowest point gains in the season during this round. When the final race came around, 8 out of 12 of the cars were either Mercedes or Porsches. For context, round 1 had 2, rounds 2 and 3 had 4, and round 4 had 2. So this was by far the highest representation of the entire season for the 2 manufacturers in the finals. This is not to suggest that the Porsche or Mercedes were either underpowered on other tracks, or that their drivers were worse. Keep in mind that there are also more Audis and BMWs in the field. Only 2 teams chose Mercedes, 3 teams chose an Audi or Porsche, and 4 teams chose BMW. Dyer McCormack would win the final over G2 Esports' Joni Tormela to become the first 2-time and back-to-back winner in ESL R1. McCormack's double win marks the height of his success in the regular season, as the Irish driver would not make any more final appearances in the following rounds. Round 6 returned to the Nürburgring GP circuit and saw the most exciting substitution of the season by far. G2 Esports replaced Robbie Stapleford, who had so far only made 1 semi-final appearance, despite nearly making 2 more, with Sebastian Job, an incredibly successful sim racer, who has won iRacing's Porsche Esports Super Cup in 2020 and has competed in F1 Esports. Job would immediately become a dominating force in ESL R1. He took pole in the final race, but fell to the back of the field after a drive-through penalty for an early start. The final of round 6 was won by Mercedes-AMG Petronas Esports' Marco Page, ahead of his teammate James Baldwin in second. This is the first finals 1-2 victory for a team in ESL R1. Round 7 marks the 3rd round at Spa-Francorchamps and saw the 2 most dominant performances by teams in the quarterfinal stage, whereby all 4 of Porsche Quanda and Team Redline's drivers scored podiums, with 3 of them winning their races. That performance largely translated into the semi-finals, where both teams had 3 drivers advance into the finals off similarly strong placings. However, it was Porsche Quanda who won the day, as Josh Rogers and Mitchell de Jong finished 1-2 in the final race. This got Josh Rogers his 2nd victory of the ESL R1 regular season, and tied Dyer McCormack for most wins. The final round of the regular season took place at Hockenheimring for the third time again. This was the last chance for drivers to secure a spot in the top 24 who would advance to the major round. There were several drivers whose performances in the last round mattered a lot because they were just at or just below the 24th position, so tensions were higher than normal. G2 Esports joined Redline, Apex Racing Team, RAG, Mercedes-AMG Petronas Esports, Williams Esports, and Porsche Quanda as the 7th team to have all 4 drivers advance to the semi-finals in a single round. Round 8 would be G2's best of the season by far. The final race was won by Team RAG's Marcel Chinchik. RAG's consistently high performance throughout the season had finally produced a win. However, the effort was not enough to win either the driver or team season championship, as both of those went to Team Redline's Luke Bennett and Team Redline respectively. Marcel and RAG were close contenders throughout the season and finished second on both leaderboards. However, the driver championship was not truly settled yet, because the actual order of the top drivers would be determined at the major. Sebastian Job made the finals of every ESL R1 round he participated in, which was admittedly only 3 rounds. He was the only driver to achieve this, although Team Redline's Luke Bennett effectively achieved the same feat after dropping his worst and only non-final result from his score. Job's 6th place finish in the final race earned him P25 overall, with just a few points short of qualifying for the major. Had Job finished 4th place or higher in the final race, or if he had joined ESL R1 earlier in the season, he would have made the cut. For the major, the top 24 drivers headed into a 2-day in-person event in Germany to crown the champion of ESL R1's first season. The drivers were split into 2 groups of 12 and competed in 4 races each, on a different track every time. The tracks included the 3 previously seen ones during the season, as well as Italy's Monza, a newly added track to Rennsport. FaZe Clan was the only team to not have a single driver qualify for the major. Conversely, Team Redline was the only team to have all 4 of their drivers qualify. Scoring in day 1 of the major followed a system quite similar to the modern F1 point system, just without a point for the fastest lap. The points drivers scored during races would be added onto the points they had already acquired during the regular season. This meant that the top 10 drivers from the season were almost guaranteed a spot in the top 12 who would advance to day 2. Meanwhile, the bottom few drivers at the major would need an impossibly good performance from themselves, coupled with abysmal performances from key rivals to scrape by into day 2. Needless to say, the magical scenarios did not happen. The only driver who finished the season outside of the top 12 who advanced into day 2 of the major was Team Redline's Enzo Bonito, who ended the season in 13th, and displaced Mousesports' Maximilian Benecke. The second and final day of the major needs a bit of explaining, because its point system is a little different, despite having 12 driver races and the same point gains from races in the first day of the major. The points are normalized, with the current points leader having 100 points, and everybody below that being assigned a proportion based on what percentage of the leader's points they had scored. Marcel Chinchik barely overtook Luke Bennett after day 1 of the major was completed, but this only translated into a 1-point lead over Team Redline's top driver after normalization occurred. Day 2 of the major had no specific length. Drivers would race until a driver who had unlocked finalist mode by reaching at least 160 points wins the race. That driver becomes a champion, and the rest of the drivers' ranks is determined by the points they had accumulated. By the way, this means that a driver does not become champion if they had fewer than 160 points, but the points they would have gained from winning their race puts them above 160, so they need to get to 160 first, and then win a race. Because the most points a driver can earn from a race is 25, and the most points they could start with was 100, the earliest that someone can become champion is race 4. Chinchik was the first to reach finalist mode after race 4 was over, so any win he got thereafter would make him champion. This almost happened the following race, where Chinchik finished second. The second driver to enter finalist mode was not Luke Bennett or Josh Rogers, the next drivers up, but rather it was James Baldwin after race 5. He had 3 straight wins in races 3, 4, and 5. That was an incredible streak. During race 6 at the Nürburgring GP circuit, Marcel Chinchik and James Baldwin were fighting for the lead and the championship, on the last lap going into the final chicane, Chinchik tried to overtake Baldwin on the outside. There was not enough room, and so there was contact between the two drivers that slowed down Baldwin enough to get hit by Chinchik's teammate from behind, spinning his Mercedes. Chinchik slowed down and gave up the win as an apology, and the incident went to race control for a decision. Neither eligible driver had won the race, so the major would continue, but would there be any penalties? Twitch chat overwhelmingly said that Chinchik was at fault for the contact, and that Baldwin had been robbed. Immediately after the race, an interviewer tried to interview both drivers. They kept it professional, but you could tell the drivers were very emotional. The interviews were short and awkward as a result. In my personal opinion, it was a racing incident because of the substantial overlap between the two cars going into the chicane. Baldwin probably should have left more space, but I understand why he wouldn't, given the context of the race. The race directors eventually declared the contact to be a racing incident with no penalties applied. Race 7 of Major Day 2 produced some incredibly close racing, but did not produce a champion. By the 8th race, which happened at Monza, there were 5 drivers in finalist mode. Luke Bennett, Josh Rogers, and Dyer McCormack were now eligible to become champions. However, it was Marcel Chinchik in the end who won, making him the first ESL R1 champion and 45,000 euros wealthier after a lap 1 turn 1 crash behind him provided around a 1.5 second lead, something he would only build up on throughout the race. Despite how close Baldwin had been to winning it all, he finished 3rd behind Luke Bennett, who accumulated more points. Overall, ESL R1 brought something new and interesting to sim racing. I hope the game and format can be refined so next season goes even better, and that the Rennsport game itself can deliver on its lofty promises, because esports is typically not profitable in and of itself, and serves as a marketing tool or a passion project. If I had to make some suggestions, I would want the races to be a little longer, maybe 20 minutes instead of 15. I also feel that the major system gives too much of an advantage to drivers who did well in the regular season, and makes it impossible for drivers who barely qualified to make it to day 2. While drivers who did well should have an advantage going in, I feel like they had too much of one. I think the decision to bring Crimsix onto the major analysis desk with Veracity was not a great decision, because neither of them could provide that much insight. Maybe have a 3-person desk instead, with guests who are familiar with sim racing more. I do think Veracity did a good job as a host though. There were also some awkward production moments where the camera would not focus on important battles, or would focus on the lead car which had a decent advantage and was unlikely to be overtaken. There are some obvious points to bring up. There was not a wide variety of cars, and especially not tracks. I don't think there was a damage model in place because cars would bounce off of walls or other cars and drive perfectly fine. And I'm not aware of things like tire, fuel, and temperature being modeled in much detail, so there are a lot of elements of sim racing that still need to be added to Rennsport. If you've been following ESL R1 for the entire season, let me know what was your favorite moment or storyline of the season. Thanks for watching.